We're talking about some giants here. And we tend to use these terms Nephilim, Amanim, all these for me, I heard that before and it was all mumble jumble to me. And so I found this really good teaching, and I'm going to attempt to explain it because it did clarify for me how these giants work. So before the flood, there was the first generation, the watchers that came down and mated with the daughters of men were called the watchers. That's the first generation of the birth of where these people come from. The second generation is the offspring of those are called the Nephilim, and the offspring of those are called the Eloi. After the flood, the seed of the giants crept in through Ham's line. So the seed crept in because remember, 8 people got on a boat. There were wives, and we know Noah killed probably someone with 6 fingers, right? He killed a descendant. So here's Ham. Ham is the son of Noah. Ham had 4 children, and they are Canaan, Put, Mitzrayim. This is where the descendant of the first king of Egypt, Osiris, comes from that lineage, and Cush, which is the father of Nimrod. So those 4 kids have these offspring now. And each of those generations had these dormant genes. The Rephaim, the Amim, the Anakim. These are offspring with hybrid seed. The Amim became this great and numerous people as tall as the Anakim. You notice how the scripture said that? And Anakim, as Anak, is the father of the Anakim. So with that in mind, so Ham, I just put it like I need a visual to understand this stuff because it's so confusing. But Ham had these 4 sons post-flood. They are significantly shorter, and I'm going to show you through the Hebrew how that is. Pre-flood, you're looking at guys this big. Okay, just to put that as a visual. Post-flood, you're probably looking at guys that big. So a little bit different in stature. Okay, so basically, when you guys remember with this back in Numbers, where we see some characteristics of okay, so let's turn back to Numbers 13. Numbers 13, starting in verse 22. And it says, and they went up to Negeb and came to Hebron, and Anaman and Shishai and Talmai. The sons of Anak were there, and Hebron had been built 7 years before, a zone of Egypt. Okay, so Canaan is a descendant of Ham. Hebron is one of the first cities established after the flood. The Anak were there. Okay, so that's that descendant line. When the spies went out to spy out the land and they saw giants and they were freaking out with their evil report, how they came back and described those giants to the rest of the people. Remember, it was one tribe member from each of the 12 tribes that went out and spied out the land. 2 came back with a good report, and the rest, it's like, we can take these guys. And the other 10 were like, oh no, there's giants, rah! Well, you know what? They describe this in Numbers, where we are as grasshoppers in their eyes. In other words, what they're saying, and actually if you go back and read the text, it calls them Nephilim. Well, that's not true. Nephilim were pre-flood. So what's going on here? Either they're lying or they're trying to tell you something. What you see in the Hebrew there is that them calling them Nephilim, they're basically saying, oh my gosh, there's giants. The Nephilim are back. They knew the story of the Nephilim. It wasn't that they were actually Nephilim. They were saying they're like Nephilim. They're huge like the Nephilim. It's the seed of the Nephilim. And that's what they were describing. Like, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're exaggerating this point that they're so big, right? They couldn't believe it. And so that's what you see back in Numbers when they're talking about these sons of Anak. And so The Nephilim is a pre-flood term, but they're attempting to explain by using a similar term to instill fear, and this is what made Jehovah so mad. And they were not 300 feet tall like we think, but back in the Nephilim age, they probably were. They were probably in actuality 9 to 16 feet tall. And you can see Judges 1:10. I've got a few more verses here. The sons of Anak come from the Nephilim, but they're not as tall. And you can read in Judges 1:20 about the three sons of Anak. You can read in Numbers 13:22, as I read, that the children of Anak, notice that he names them, they're three: Ashaman, Sheshai, and Talmai. So you ever hear of, to illustrate this further, I'm just going to pick on you guys, you men out there, then you go fishing and you say, oh, we went fishing and we caught a fish and it was this big. But in actuality, it was probably like this big. That's kind of the idea, right? That's what gives us the essence of what they were doing. And so we see the Anakim a lot in the book of Joshua. And Joshua 14:15. Now the name of Hebron before Kirath Arba, which was Arba, was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had a rest from war. So who were the Anak? This was the lineage that King Saul was supposed to kill them all, and he didn't. He gosh darn didn't. He left a few women, he left a few things, and he didn't obey. And if he would have, think of the problems that we would have been spared to today, because he was supposed to annihilate them all. So we have the Amorites, or the Anak, the Emimim, the Zuzim, or the Zamzumim is another word for Zuzim, and the Rephaim. And so you can see, this is a really good illustration. So here's an average 6-foot man, let's just say for the sake of argument. You can see we're about to read, and especially in the next chapter of Deuteronomy, we're going to read of Og of Bashan. You can see that's the Goliath scale. You can see but between 12 and 18 feet how big these guys were. But the early Canaanites, and on a giant scale, and you can see Amos 2:9, where they're between 24 and 36 feet. And so you can see there's a little bit difference in the height.